The Expiration Date, A Journey to Mental Health and Freedom. Chapter 1, Echoes of Yesterday. The mahogany grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight, its deep resonance filling the house with the same haunting melody that had punctuated Samantha's childhood. She stood in the doorway of her old bedroom, running her fingers along the doorframe where pencil marks still tracked her growth. Each line told a story, not just of inches gained, but of dreams lost. "Sam? What are you doing up there?" Her mother's voice carried up the stairs, sharp and demanding even after all these years. At 32, Samantha still felt herself shrinking at the sound, her shoulders curving inward like a wilting flower. "Just getting the last of my things, Mom," she called back, hating the tremor in her voice. She'd come to clean out her childhood room, a task that should have taken hours at most. Yet here she was, 3 days later, still drowning in the undertow of memories. The room was exactly as she'd left it 5 years ago, pale blue walls now faded to a ghostly gray, posters of long-forgotten bands curling at the edges, and a collection of participation trophies gathering dust on wooden shelves. Her father had called them medals for mediocrity with that familiar sneer that made her feel smaller than the bronze figures atop each plastic base. Samantha crossed to the window, her feet remembering which floorboards would betray her movement with a creak. The muscle memory made her pause. Even now, she was moving through her own life like a thief, trying to avoid detection. When had she learned to make herself so small? To apologize for the space she occupied in the world? She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the maple tree that had been her sole confidant through years of silent tears. Its branches scraped against the house in the autumn wind, a sound that used to terrify her as a child until she reimagined it as friendly waves from a loyal friend. "Samantha Marie. I need help with these dishes." The command sent her heart racing, an involuntary response honed by years of conditioning. But as she turned to comply, her hip bumped against her old desk, dislodging a notebook she hadn't noticed before. It fell with a soft thud, its pages splaying open like wings. The handwriting inside was rounder, more hopeful, her 14-year-old self's cursive dancing across the pages. Dreams spelled out in purple ink: "I want to be an artist. I want to travel the world. I want to be brave." Samantha's vision blurred as she read the words, feeling them resonate in her chest like the toll of that grandfather clock. When had she stopped wanting those things? When had she started believing she didn't deserve them? "I'm counting to 3, young lady." The notebook trembled in her hands. She could feel it happening again, the automatic response to drop everything, to run downstairs, to smooth things over. To make herself smaller, quieter, more acceptable. But something had shifted. Perhaps it was seeing her younger self's dreams laid bare on those pages, or perhaps it was simply that the weight of all these years had finally become too heavy to carry. Whatever the reason, Samantha felt something crack inside her chest, not breaking, but breaking free. She squared her shoulders and took a deep breath. "No," she whispered, testing the word on her tongue. Then louder, her voice steady for the first time in years, "No, Mom. I'm busy right now." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, standing in her childhood bedroom with her teenage dreams in her hands, Samantha felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. She looked down at the notebook again, at the purple ink that had somehow survived all these years. Without thinking, she grabbed a pen from the desk and, beneath her teenage aspirations, wrote in firm, clear strokes, "It's not too late to start." Outside, the maple tree's branches swayed in a sudden gust of wind. This time, Samantha was sure it was applauding. Chapter 2, The First Step. The yoga studio smelled of sandalwood and new beginnings. Samantha shifted uncomfortably on her borrowed mat, watching others flow effortlessly through their movements, while she struggled to match her breath to her poses. "Remember," the instructor, Maya, called out softly, "the pose begins the moment you want to leave it." Samantha almost laughed at how perfectly those words captured her entire life, always wanting to leave, always staying anyway. But today was different. Today, she had left. After her confrontation in her childhood bedroom 2 weeks ago, something had shifted. She'd packed her car with essentials and driven to her aunt's beach house in Newport. Aunt Sarah, her mother's estranged sister, had always told her there was a room waiting if she needed it. Now, surrounded by the sound of waves and the absence of criticism, Samantha was learning to breathe again. The yoga class had been Maya's idea. They'd met at the local coffee shop where Samantha had been hiding behind her laptop, half-heartedly applying for graphic design jobs, the career she'd abandoned for the accounting degree her father had demanded. "You look like someone who needs to reconnect with their body," Maya had said, sliding a class pass across the table. Her warm brown eyes and gentle smile made it impossible to take offense at the observation. Now, as Samantha moved through another wobbly downward dog, she felt something loosen in her chest. Her body might be stiff, but it was hers. Every awkward pose was an act of reclamation. Chapter 3: The Butterfly Effect. Spring bloomed along the coast, and with it, Samantha's world began to expand. Maya introduced her to others in the yoga community: survivors, healers, artists. Each carried their own stories of transformation. There was James, who taught art therapy at the community center, his arms covered in tattoos that told the story of his recovery from addiction. Elena, a retired dancer who now counseled domestic violence survivors, moved through life with a grace that spoke of hard-won peace. And Rachel, whose laugh could fill a room, despite, or perhaps because of, everything she'd overcome. They became her chosen family, each one helping her piece together the puzzle of who she was, beyond her trauma. In James's art class, she rediscovered her love for creating. Elena taught her about boundaries, about the power of no, and the revolution in choosing yourself. Rachel showed her how to laugh again, really laugh, until her sides hurt and tears came, the good kind, the healing kind. Chapter 4: The Storm Breaks. The call came on a Tuesday. Her father was in the hospital, a heart attack. Her mother's voice on the phone was both demanding and desperate: "You need to come home. Now." Samantha sat on her aunt's porch, watching waves crash against the shore as she considered her response. 6 months ago, she would have already been in her car, racing back to resume her role as the family peacekeeper, emotional punching bag, and perfect daughter. But now, "I'll think about it," she said quietly, surprising both herself and her mother with her calm resolve. The silence on the other end was thick with unspoken accusations. Finally, her mother spoke, voice trembling with familiar manipulation. "I don't understand how you could be so selfish. After everything we've done for you." "That's exactly why I need to think about it," Samantha interrupted, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I need to consider what's healthy for me." She ended the call and immediately texted her support group. Within an hour, they were all there: Maya with her calming presence, James with his honest insights, Elena with her wisdom, and Rachel with emergency ice cream. Chapter 5: The Expiration Date. In the end, Samantha did visit her father, but on her own terms. She walked into the hospital room not as the frightened daughter seeking approval, but as a woman who had learned her own worth. Her father looked smaller in the hospital bed, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Her mother hovered nearby, a storm of anxiety and control, barely contained. "I can stay for an hour," Samantha announced calmly, setting the boundary before anyone could assume otherwise. "I'm glad you're recovering, Dad." The conversation that followed was stilted, heavy with years of unspoken pain. But when her mother started in on the familiar guilt trip about Samantha's abandonment of the family, something remarkable happened. Samantha stood up, gathered her bag, and simply said, "I love you both, but I won't participate in this anymore." Some relationships have expiration dates, not because we stop caring, but because we start caring about ourselves too. She walked out of the hospital into the bright afternoon sun, tears streaming down her face, but her steps never faltering. Chapter 6: New Dawn. 1 year after finding her old journal, Samantha stood in her own studio apartment, surrounded by her artwork. Her first gallery showing was in 2 weeks, small and local, but hers. Maya had helped her design business cards that read Samantha Chen, artist and graphic designer. On her wall hung a framed piece of paper, her old journal entry with its purple ink dreams, now accompanied by her adult handwriting marking them as accomplished. Next to it was a new list. I am an artist. I am healing. I am brave. I am free. The morning light streamed through her windows, catching on the crystals Elena had given her, sending rainbows dancing across her walls. Her phone buzzed with a good luck text from Rachel about a job interview later that day. On her desk, a stack of thank you cards waited to be sent to her art therapy group. Samantha touched the journal page gently, tracing the words of her younger self. We did it, she whispered. We finally did it. She caught her reflection in the window, head high, shoulders back, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The woman looking back at her wasn't unbreakable, she was something better. She was broken and mended, scarred and healing, uncertain but unafraid. The expiration date of her old life had passed, and what remained was a future full of possibilities, a future that belonged entirely to her. Epilogue. In her weekly art therapy session, Samantha worked on a new piece. It was a portrait of a girl releasing butterflies from a mason jar, each butterfly carrying away a different weight: guilt, shame, fear, obligation. But the girl in the painting wasn't looking at what she was letting go, she was looking forward, toward the sunrise. James leaned over to look at her work. It's beautiful, he said. What are you going to call it? Samantha smiled, adding one final butterfly to the scene. The expiration date, she replied. But it's not about endings anymore. It's about beginnings. Outside, the world went about its business. Inside, a woman who had learned to set herself free picked up her brush and continued to paint her own story. The end.